The young woman in the government building was ignored, until the security team proved their power. Before we begin, share in the comments which city you're watching this video from today. The government building in Washington, D.C. was constructed with a harsh harmony of concrete and glass. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, gleaming and resonating with the echo of footsteps on the polished marble floor. The atmosphere inside was silent but tense. Everyone was buried in their work, eyes fixed on screens, hands gripping coffee mugs tightly. It looked like an ordinary afternoon. Until that moment. When a young woman in a black dress entered the building, no one turned to look. She was Elena Voss. Nothing about her appearance was particularly noteworthy. She had no file in her hand, carried no bag, and wore no ID badge. But her walk. There was something different there. Each step of her heels seemed to leave an intention on the floor. Neither too fast nor hesitant. Her eyes were fixed straight ahead, she didn't look to the right or left, seemingly uninterested in anything. But in reality, she noticed everything. Mark, a young security officer standing at the corner of the corridor, was the first to notice her. The rhythm of Elena's walk didn't resemble that of any intern. Her shoulders were up, chin firm, neck tense but controlled. Like a soldier, maybe more. She was trained. Clearly, her presence in the building was no coincidence. Mark moved to touch his radio but hesitated. Something held him back. Perhaps the cold determination in the woman's eyes, or maybe the silence of those who followed behind her. Because just seconds later, there was movement at the end of the hallway. 5 soldiers, including 2 agents, one of them a woman, quietly aligned themselves behind Elena. Their dark green camouflage uniforms were unlike any usual Pentagon units. Their weapons weren't visible, perhaps that made it more unsettling. Their earpieces, glasses, even their gait, everything was synchronized. The leader of the soldiers spoke in a low voice, protection complete. Elena knew she wasn't alone. She never had been. For a moment, the corridor was engulfed in silence. Even the clicking of keyboards stopped. Elena's eyes didn't rest on anyone, but everyone's eyes were on her. No one knew her, but everything seemed to revolve around her. Inside Mark, a voice said, "Stop her, ask, find out," but another voice said, "Don't interfere." Because in situations like this, questions only brought trouble. At the far end of the building, the doors of the large conference room opened automatically. Inside was a long table covered in red carpet, leather chairs, the American flag, and a sealed file at the center. Elena was there for that file. But it wasn't the documents inside, it was herself that was the most classified information. She seemed to be entering the building for the first time, yet she knew it like the back of her hand. Because Elena Voss was not an ordinary person. And Washington, D.C. hadn't faced such a silent threat in a long time. After the incident, Mark paused for a few seconds. There was a curiosity inside him, even a touch of fear. But he couldn't resist the urge. He followed Elena and finally gathered the courage to speak. "Ms. Voss, those soldiers, why are they protecting you?" Elena stopped. She straightened her shoulders, slightly turned her head. Then, gently pulling aside her black dress, she revealed a badge on her chest. Small but impressive, a hawk with open wings, a silver star beneath it, and the inscription, 2020. Mark's heart raced. It was a special badge subject to strict security protocols. Not military, specific to intelligence units. Its meaning was deeper than most people could ever know. "Of course it's part of a mission," Elena said, her voice firm but emotionless. Then she continued walking. But Mark stood there, frozen. Unanswered questions swirled in his mind. He saw again Elena's calm walk down the corridor. The synchronized steps of the soldiers behind her. It felt like a ceremony, a passage. That night, Mark entered the archive room as far as the night guards allowed. His access was limited, but he managed to review old reports. He searched Elena Voss operation. At first, nothing appeared. But digging deeper, one document caught his eye. The title of the document was redacted. But the keywords were striking: 2020, critical cyber attack, failed coup attempt, identity confidential agent. It described a digital attack that had marked a turning point in national history. That year, control over the country's strategic infrastructure changed hands within minutes. All communication networks were locked down, national security was at risk. But then, through someone's intervention, the systems were reclaimed. Mark squinted. A final sentence in one paragraph of the report stood out. The agent was awarded the Hawk Badge at the end of the operation, and their name was archived forever. Mark leaned back. The woman from that morning came to his mind. Her black dress, silent steps, the focused look in her eyes. The next morning, Mark saw her again in the same corridor. Elena was reviewing a document. Light streamed through the glass wall, casting her silhouette like a sculpture. Despite the pounding in his chest, Mark approached. "Elena," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "that badge, were you the one who stopped the cyber attack in 2020? Elena looked up. She closed the document, paused for a moment. Then looked at Mark. Her eyes held no fear, no pride. Only the weight of the past. "Yes," she said. Her voice was soft like the wind but firm. "But I wasn't alone that night. Behind me was a team no one knows about. The building still remembers them. The walls are silent, but they never forget." Mark swallowed. He felt like he had witnessed a hidden piece of national history. "Were you that agent?" Elena didn't answer. She smiled, but it was a cold smile. Then she gave a slight nod and walked away. A few employees in the corridor looked up. As if they too sensed, in that moment, who Elena really was. Her presence no longer seemed like just another stranger or intern. And from that moment on, for Mark, Elena was not just a woman, but a symbol walking straight out of history. A hero in the shadows. Silent, invisible, but unforgettable. Elena's past was no longer a secret in Mark's mind, it was a truth to be faced. But the weight of that truth was not easy to bear. Every time Mark passed by Elena's office, he felt she was more than just a clerk, she was a shadow warrior who had fought the country's darkest threats for years. But what he wondered most was why Elena was still here. After all that experience, why did she choose to remain in this gray building, living like an ordinary official? One morning, they met by the coffee machine. Elena's gaze was distant. Mark hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "That day, how did you save the system?" Elena was silent for a moment. Then, she turned her gaze to Mark. "It wasn't a plan," she said. "It was an instinct. I made the right move in a moment of emptiness. And that moment never came again." Mark felt the weight in her words. It wasn't just a technical success, it was a mental, emotional, and perhaps even a moral test. After that day, Elena had changed, though she never said it, it was clear. Those who watched her could sense a storm hiding behind the calm in her eyes. But that storm only emerged in moments of danger. One evening, a fire alarm rang through the building. People were in a panic. The fire had been caused by a short circuit on one of the floors. Security systems were down. But at that very moment, Elena intervened in the computer system. She manually restarted the alarm system, directed people, and led the evacuation. In everyone's eyes, at that moment, Elena was no longer just an employee, she was a guide. After this incident, Mark realized something: Elena's past didn't follow her like a shadow. On the contrary, that past burned inside her like a light, and when needed, it shone. Maybe Elena wasn't here because of her past, maybe she was here to protect the future. Hidden from view, but like a power always ready to act. The chapter closes with a scene where Mark's respect and admiration for Elena deepens. By now, everyone had begun to realize that she was not an ordinary civil servant. But for Elena, that didn't matter. She did her duty and moved on. Because the true awakening of power is not in showiness, but in silence, simplicity, and the courage to act when it matters most. After learning about Elena's past, Mark didn't keep it to himself. Slowly but deliberately, he began talking to others in the building, to a clerk during a tea break, to a soldier during the evening shift change, to a technician in the cafeteria at lunch. He told them about Elena's past contributions. At first, these stories were met with surprise. Her. Really? Some asked, and then they began quietly observing her. They started to notice the determination in her walk, the depth in her silence. A few days later, a gray-haired woman with piercing eyes appeared at the building entrance. Clara, a former intelligence agent. She showed her ID and asked for Mark. "Is Elena Voss here?" she asked, her voice carrying the weight of years. Mark nodded. "She is. Why do you ask?" Clara answered without breaking eye contact, "She's the one who saved my team in 2020. Mark let her in. Elena was sitting alone in the cafeteria. Clara approached her quietly. "Do you recognize me?" she asked. Elena glanced briefly. "Northern Operation," she replied simply. Clara nodded. "I never got to thank you. Now I can." Elena stayed silent, but her eyes softened. In that moment, a bond long held within began to loosen. Clara placed an envelope on the table, an old photo, with a note on the back, "We owe you our lives. See." That night, Mark made a suggestion, "Let's organize a ceremony for you. People should know by now." Elena opposed. Heroism walks in secrecy. But Mark insisted. Eventually, the building's management organized an official security ceremony. On the day of the ceremony, the hall was full of staff. Some still didn't know Elena, but most had been touched by the stories shared recently. When Elena was called to the stage, the room was silent. The badge on her shoulder gleamed in the light. She spoke just a few words. Silence sometimes speaks the loudest. "I only did my duty." Applause erupted. The soldiers stood and saluted, their eyes filled with genuine respect. The crowd applauded for minutes. After that day, Elena became known as the Hawk Agent. Her story began to spread like a legend. The National Intelligence Museum wanted to exhibit her badge and codebook. Elena agreed, but with one condition. Let this be displayed on behalf of all the silent workers. On the day of the museum ceremony, many came, journalists, former agents, new recruits. An elderly man stepped forward at the end of the ceremony. With a cane in his hand and a tired but resolute face, he said, "You saved my team. We didn't even exist on the radar. But you did." For the first time, Elena couldn't hold back her tears. This moment, for her, was not one of heroism, but one of humanity. When the ceremony ended, Mark approached her with a small note in his hand. It read only one sentence. "The building is proud of you." Elena took the note, folded it, and placed it in her pocket. She smiled gently. "Maybe," she said, "the hawk flies here, too." There was a silence in the building. But it wasn't an ordinary silence. It was the silence of a power that everyone had finally come to recognize. And from that silence came a question. Have you ever known someone like Elena? A power protected in silence?